Have you ever felt like being a GM can be a little bit overwhelming, like all the prep and all the improv? Well, today on the Wizards of Eem Podcast, we're going to be talking about sharing narrative authority and why giving up a little bit of control can actually make for better games.
So in traditional RPGs, usually the GM carries like all the weight of the storytelling duties.
Right.
The world building, the NPCs, the outcomes, all the secrets and all that. But sharing narrative authority means that you're giving some of that load up to the players.
Yeah, and that means the players can help define what's going on in the world. They can contribute to outcomes and to the fiction, that they can collaborate with the GM and the other players while the game is going on.
In our own game, Land of Eem, this is built directly into the mechanics. There's a dice system that really requires everyone's input at the table, because multiple heads are better than one when you're asking a GM to interpret dice rolls all the time.
Yeah, and this, on the surface, it may not seem like it's for everybody. Not every GM likes to give up narrative authority. They have crafted the stories. They want to take people through it. And especially if your table is not used to that kind of gameplay, it can be a new sort of thing to introduce. But for Ben and I, we always loved riffing off of each other and the GM and our buddies when we were playing games all the way to now. And so for us, it is kind of like a fun extra way to provide improv that lessens all that pressure on the GM as a byproduct. Because like Ben said, in Land of Eem, we have a dice mechanic that specifically gives you variable results like twists and pluses to your failures and successes that sometimes are not obvious. But when you have everybody at the table coming up with what terrible thing may happen, or it adds a lot of a forward momentum to the gameplay that we think is a ton of fun and gives GMs a chance to breathe.
And it's not completely giving up all your authority as a GM.
Sure.
There are things you can hold on to keep the integrity of the game going. So it doesn't feel like too chaotic, and we'll get deeper into that as we discuss.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we should talk a little bit about how it may specifically take the pressure off of a GM when this kind of, when you give up some of that authority. There's like a million YouTube videos about GM burnout, right? Like the idea that you've put all this energy into prep and improv and memorizing rules and figuring out the pacing of your campaign. Maybe even you're doing voices for characters. All that stuff can be a lot of extra work on top of our already busy lives. And so GM burnout's a real thing. We think, and from our experience as two super busy professionals, is sharing the creative load in Land of Eem for ourselves actually provides the GM with that breather that I was just talking about. It gives you a way to flex the creativity of the rest of the table to help explain like what's going on in the room, or what do you see, or what do you hear.
Sorry.
I was going to say, unlike our actual plays, we'll often create more problems for ourselves than we need because we'll let it get away from us and be like, oh, but there's an alligator in the pond. It's like that you were never going to go there as a GM.
Yeah,
but we just did it because it just adds some fun or flavor.
Yeah, when you're a GM, you have so many things going on in your head that any ease of that pressure should be a super big help. I know that when I'm GMing, I'm thinking about 3 other things in my mind when you guys are talking.
Mm-hmm.
And
oh yeah,
you can easily forget things. You forget rules, you forget a plan that you were going to execute. And so if you take off one piece of that mental load, it really eases the pressure of being a GM, reduces the burnout, and you'll find that you'll be better at the other things because you're giving up some of the control over here.
Yeah, that's totally true. And reducing that burnout may actually just be those little bits, not having to come up with a solution for how the players may play out a certain scenario, because the players will help you come up with how it gets played out and how NPCs would react, or you don't have to think through every possible equation of what can go on. It also, in a big way, reduces the expectation of being the perfect storyteller. On the Land of Eem Discord, there's always people that are like, I'm giving it my first shot. And sometimes they feel stressed that they're going to be GMing for the first time. They want it to go really well. Well, by sharing some of the creative load, you're not put into a scenario where you have to be this perfect fireside storyteller, giving these people an experience. That's not how we come to the table when we're playing tabletop RPGs. We're all playing together in our minds, not necessarily being an audience to the GM's perfectly prepped, Lord of the Rings epic.
And we've certainly played that way in the past where like we're coming to it with this really detailed story and we're trying to make it unfold perfectly and all that. And it does add so much pressure to being a GM. And the reality is you can prep for hours and hours. When you bring it to the table, it's never going to be exactly as you imagined unless you get super lucky 1 out of 100 times. So playing this way, where you're sharing some of this load, it prevents you from having to be burdened by some perfection.
Right. Or to constantly generate ideas, where instead you can generate some ideas and react to other ideas and then decide on what happens together. That's like so much of how our actual play ends up being. Instead of facing burnout all the time, you become more of a facilitator for everyone to curate ideas and try out ideas, and for the fellow players to come up with new discoveries on their own for what might take place in a particular scenario.
I guess we'll wait. I keep thinking like, okay, so what about for that GM who's like, well, I don't want to just completely derail everything that I had. Like there's some things that need to, be kept in the campaign that can't just be undone by a player's whim. So what's in it for the players? Well, players get more creative input, and this is fun, obviously. They're not just reacting to things, they're contributing. They're inventing locations, NPCs, rumors, facts about the world. And they don't have to be these, big, important facts that alter the course of the campaign.
Right.
There are little details. When I'm GMing and people ask, like, what's this guy's name? Or what's this little detail? Sometimes it's a lot easier to just say, I don't know. What do you think? Like, because I haven't thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
So why do I need to have that mental load? Like your answer is just as good as mine because I haven't thought 1 second
about who that random NPC is that you happened upon in a random encounter, or it sounds like something small, but it really piles up when you're playing for hours a week, or like, for us, we're playing for years on end.
Yeah, it totally adds flavor to scenes that the GM just couldn't even think about or come up with on the fly, So ultimately, I think this leads to a greater investment in the story in the game on the player's part when their creative contributions are being mixed in. Because it feels like it's a part of them. They're making things come true. And as I said, they don't have to be campaign defining details. If you're wary about this sharing narrative authority, you can build out the margins of the world, like stuff you have never thought about, stuff that's like not that impactful on the grand story that's happening. I'll just give an example, like in Land of Eem. Like I'm going to say that all goblins are pirates, and as a GM, you can be like, okay, well, let's tone that idea down a bit and say like goblins are pirates. You don't have to make it a huge overarching fact every time.
No, and even that is like a pretty good example of like something was generated not by the GM and you guys met halfway and it sped it up like creatively. But specific to Land of Eem, people have talked about how there's abilities that shake the world around you. And what does that really mean? That you're creating the campaign world that the GM is trying to present to the players? No. Many of the powers and abilities that do that sort of thing, like I find a tavern, or I meet an NPC, or I tell a story, they're actually situational powers. They're impacting the actual moment that you use them for a benefit to the party. They don't necessarily need to be that all things are this way or all things are that way, or now there's this new city here. They're not necessarily meant to be that flexible, but they do get buy-in from the players to feel like they're part of creating the world, and it absolutely sticks with you. Like George and I and Peter and Darren, we've been like creating things all around us. And I remember like so many of the things that we created that maybe weren't even particularly consequential to the campaign, but added so much flavor and so much fun and like laughs for weeks on end. That's really what we're getting at here.
Yeah. And one thing I think about in our own campaign is letting George just like speak for NPCs, like NPCs in your party, which I find great because sometimes I forget certain NPCs are there. Like we could go an entire adventure without realizing, oh yeah, you've got that guy in your party.
So any diehard person that's like been with us through the actual play for all these years knows that like we always joke around about this segment where George GMs himself. and obviously it's like tongue in cheek for sure, but like there are moments where George just like will basically kind of GM a moment with an NPC or with whatever that actually adds tons of flavor. And like you heard it here first, I never want him to stop doing that because it's so fun.
Neither do I. It's a from a GM's perspective, it is a big mental load taken off my plate. Like running through the Rolodex of what every NPC's voice is. I mean, that'll spin me in circles. Like I never, especially between like not playing for a couple weeks. Like I don't remember what Hankel the Spithra's voice is. I've changed it probably 10 times.
Yeah. And it always sort of just shifts slightly into Jeff Goldblum, like at any given time. No, but that's what it's about. It's the creative input from the players. And we talked a little bit about this when we first started chatting about this. The aspect of Land of Eem that is the variable die roll with the D12, success with a twist, failure with a plus. Defining those outcomes in like every situation during a session can be taxing if you don't have a lot of tools like at your disposal, or maybe one particular scenario has got you stumped. That's where the players can really come in. The players can say, okay, here's the twist, or suggest twists. And when we play, it's like pour out of us until we land on something we all like. And it's not like it's a debate. It happens in like seconds and then you're moving on to the next thing. Yeah. And that I think is huge for Land of Eem, because we have gotten comments from people who are like, I don't know, like, how do I like define a twist? And, you know, how like what happens? Well, it could be a lot of different things, but activating everyone at the table to come up with ideas just totally eliminates that pressure.
100%. I can't tell you how many times that if it were just up to me in our streams to come up with the twists and stuff, like we could be sitting there for several minutes, but just activate the group. And not every idea is going to be great, but they'll spark something, maybe, even if it's like a gonzo idea.
Yeah. And that happens every time we play. Every time we play. And ultimately, it does all lead into the investment of the story. So the players go away from the table feeling more energized. They didn't need you to be a perfect storyteller. They just wanted to be a part of what that felt like. And it goes a long way for making the games really, really fun.
And it supports emergent play, which is, in our estimation, like one of the best ways to play a TTRPG is not to follow a pre-plotted story every time, but really play to find out what happens organically together. You know, you're thrown into a scenario and you have no idea how it's going to turn out. Obviously, when you have multiple heads, multiple people chiming in, that's going to like exponentially make it emergent.
Right. And we're not saying that like a structured story game is bad in any way. It's just, we're saying that if you're looking for the tools to make it easier potentially for yourself creatively, emergent play is definitely the way to go, because it just takes away the pressure of being the perfect tale teller. Like you don't have to have everyone enwrapped because everyone's part of telling the tale.
Yeah. And, you know, part of that for Land of Eem is random encounters, does emergent play, but sharing the narrative authority is really going to move every single needle in a different direction. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And it becomes like, I was just going to say, it becomes like an engine to create surprises that are also surprises to the GM.
Which is fun for a GM.
Yes, it's super fun. It's like, well, I didn't see that coming. And it's, you know, actually one of my favorite things on the Discord is when people are like that. I just ran my game, like, and give us like the synopses of what happened in the game. There's always like this one thing that went totally different from what the GM was thinking. And I cannot tell you how many times I've like fallen out of my chair laughing at like that. And then they tried to do this and I didn't expect that. It's so great because everybody just walks away being surprised and having a lot of fun. And that's what it's about. Like Land of Eem is about having a lot of fun. And emergent games are about having fun. That's why we do this. We don't do it to feel dread.
Like you can often get into the mode of like, this feels like putting on a presentation. This being a GM, having all the answers, and everyone's relying on me to have fun. I'm going through and I'm giving this great presentation to you guys. That isn't fun for me. What is fun is playing with, like, I love being a player.
Yeah.
I love, I love being a player, and I love the shared collaborative moments of everyone at the table, just riffing with each other.
When nobody knows what's going to happen at the table, it can make the table feel electric. Like it makes it feel like alive. And that's I think a lot of fun.
And it lets players flex their GM muscles.
That's true.
Like we were saying, like naming NPCs, describing the consequences, adding complications. I mean, ideally, every group should have multiple GMs. Like you want there to be some variety, so you're not stuck in the forever GM role.
Like Ben is.
Well, luckily in our greater group, I'm not the forever GM.
That's true.
Only on the Land of Eem streams.
It is true. It can ultimately give players a taste for what it would be like to be the GM and how not scary it is when you're all coming up with ideas. Not just because it's relieving that pressure from you, but because you see like, oh, that we can just say things, like we can just like come up with stuff and then figure it out. That I think is a window into what being a GM could be like in like an emergent game like Land of Eem is kind of I think is a really good way to start. Because with Land of Eem, obviously you have the sandbox and like there's like all kinds of characters and quests and just like creative material available to you. There's also all the random encounters that have a little bit more depth than just like you bump into 4 wolves or a lot of the power under the engine. That actually does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. But just seeing how everybody can be creative together at the table, I think it definitely for me, like shows you that GMing is not as scary as it may seem like when compared against being the ultimate storyteller who's got it all planned out. That's I think a misconception that people can have about tabletop gaming.
Yeah, and it also builds your RPG skills in all aspects. Builds your confidence to role play, to have your ideas heard and your creativity on display, and working with your friends to come up with funny, cool things. That's only going to make your game stronger moving forward as everyone heightens their narrative instincts and improv abilities.
Yeah, definitely. And it scratches that creative itch without, requiring the player to be master of the dice mechanics or doing all the session prep that they think they got to do, or like having the responsibility of figuring out they got to go here. It's like it just takes that away, so you can play and be creative without it.
All right. So for all you skeptics out there, be like, you know what, this sounds great, but when I put it into practice, everything's going to go sideways. I'm going to stick to my module and just play it that way. I'll prep everything. I'm going to spend 9 hours prepping. If I make a mistake, I'm going to be in my head for like a week afterwards.
That's true, though. People get that way. I used to get that way. I actually used to get that way when I GM'd way back when we were in college. I only GM'd like half a dozen quests that I can't even remember. But I remember feeling the pressure of it. I remember feeling like I got to come up with all this stuff. I got to whatever. And that was before I was even like aware of the process of emergent play or this kind of gaming. I feel that personally.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common thing. But it's important for us to let you know that we're not saying you're just giving up all your authority.
No,
as it were.
No, as it were. Yeah, authority. It's not about giving up authority.
Because
in Land of Eem, some structure.
Yeah, you need structure. In Land of Eem, the rule book, we say you are encouraged to ask your players for input on everything, but you have the final say, just so there's like some order in the chaos. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I drink the potion, it makes me invincible. Well, no, it doesn't.
Yes, and is the overarching principle here of working with players' ideas. But in that same toolbox, you have, yes, you drank the potion and something happens, but you're not invincible. Maybe you're invincible for one round or whatever.
Yeah.
Or no, you're not invincible. But some other random things happens. I don't know off the top of my head. I'll ask James, what you want to. Do you have any ideas
for that specifically? No, but I totally follow you. Ultimately, it's not about losing control of your creative vision. It's about distributing some of that creativity intentionally. And like all those little bite-sized chunks, they end up making a whole pie. And you'd be amazed how much easier it can be by just spreading around the creative love.
So if you're a GM, what are some practical things that could help? Clear prompts and questions. Like, what are you exactly asking for help with? And defined moments. And all this in Land of Eem, it's easier for us to talk about because it's baked into the game. But defined moments for player input, really like situational things like James was talking about earlier. Unless you're doing something in a session 0 where you're coming up with the world together, which is also another way to do this.
And important.
Right. But like not asking for the players to really make these important on the fly suggestions about your story that is going on in the background, but the smaller, finer details, the situational moments.
That's really well said. It's not about like suddenly the player is saddled with determining the motivations of your campaign's villain. It's about how do you think this person might react after you said that?
Yeah.
It's like, it's granular, it's ground level, it's street level.
Exactly. There are ways to keep it the integrity of the tone intact.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, that's basically all. I love talking about stuff like this. Like it's fun to work through it. So anyway,
if you have been on the fence about sharing your sweet narrative authority, give it a shot. Try it out. Talk to your players about it beforehand and say, hey, you know what? This sounds cool. Like, why don't we try coming up with more things on the fly together, improving a bit more while we play. And you can also play Land of Eem. If it seems interesting to you, download the dice mechanic is all about this. It's baked right into it. So you're going to be having to do this several times a session.
Yep. And there's examples and things, but you'll also see that once you get into the groove of it, it's pretty natural to ask people, what do you think? And that's really where it starts. So that's all for now. Take it easy, folks.
Until next time. Bye-bye.
Farewell.